So just a couple more minutes and then we'll get going here. I promise. What? It's on speaker deck. My username is Malin, I think. I don't remember. I think it's Malin1, actually. Yeah, it's speaker deck MR Allen1. It's not supposed to be Mr. Allen. I'm not that formal. It's just that all the other variations of my extremely common name were taken on Yahoo, so yeah. And as far as I can tell, it's like me and one other guy that actually uses Yahoo Mail still, so it's whatever it is. But Sawyer in the house. Thanks for coming. I didn't mean to single you out, though. Hey, man. I'm Mark. Yeah, let's hang out. All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Mark Allen. Today I'm going to talk about Dancer, which is a web framework for Perl. It's very inspired by Sinatra, and there are actually several frameworks for Perl that you may be familiar with. It seems that some come each month, but this is the one that I started on, and just it really, whatever about it just sort of clicked for me, so I've kind of stuck with it. I have a talk tomorrow where I'm going to kind of be comparing and contrasting some various platform as a service providers like .cloud and Heroku, and I've written the same application in 4 different web frameworks: Mojo, Dancer, Flask, which is written in Python, and Web Machine, which is Erlang. And they all do the same job. And so if you want to learn more about Perl platform as a service, like compare and contrast, see which ones do which, how magical they are, and that sort of thing, come to my talk tomorrow. It's 20 minutes long, so it's a little bit shorter than this, but it's also a nice example application, how to implement something, and if you're already familiar with Mojo or something, maybe it will give you a leg up with Dancer. So the way that this talk is broken down is it's kind of developed into 5 different parts. I'm going to talk about the old days. I'm going to talk about the various properties that Dancer has, how awesome it is. And then I'm going to kind of talk about some resources. So all the code that you're going to see in my slides is available. I think it's still on Bitbucket. I actually kind of prefer Bitbucket to GitHub, but no one else does apparently. So yeah, so most of my code is on GitHub. Like almost all of my Perl code is on GitHub, but this particular stuff is all on Bitbucket, just FYI. And I think I mentioned this before, but if you weren't in the room, the slides for this talk are on slide deck or speaker deck. My username is mrallen1. Oh yeah. All right. Well, I will upload this to speaker deck, so it will be on speaker deck. Apparently, it's not already. I thought it was, so I'm mistaken about that. But let's get going. So, as I said, I'm going to talk about the old days. And how many of you started writing CGI apps kind of back in the early days of Perl, like wrote with actual Perl 4 or CGI lib PL? All right, awesome. So there's some old timers in here. That's fantastic. How many of you started using CGI.pm back in 95, 96? Cool, very good. And how many of you have used mod Perl, which started in 96? Okay, good. Now this next slide, maybe you don't want to raise your hand for. I understand, that's fine. How many of you have used Mat Script Archive? All right, a couple of brave people, cool. Yeah, okay, all right, that's fine, that's valid. I just want to say, if you are still using Mat Script Archive, or you have like a lame uncle who has a website for his car repair business and he's using Mat Script Archive for some reason, please, please, please change all of that. The London PM group actually rewrote all of Mat Script Archive in literate Perl, so it's actually like tested and secure and nice and fun to read, and you can find all that on SourceForge. So if you know anyone out there who is still using Mat Script Archive for some reason, all equivalent replacements are available at that URL. And as I said, this slide deck will be available on speaker deck, so you don't have to write it down right now. So most of you are probably familiar with a script like this. Kind of starts off with CGI PM. The goal here is what we're going to try to do is collect a bunch of parameters, And I'm going to test to see if the parameter A is actually \d. Now, if you know anything about Unicode, you will learn that in Perl 5.14 that \d actually matches any Unicode number, not just ASCII 0 through 9. So this is actually not a good test anymore. But what this attempts to do is detect to see if A is an integer. And if it's not, then it sends back a bad request because A has to be an integer, and I'm testing for that. Maybe some of you have done things like this, where you had a CGI implementation and you kind of wanted to hide it. You wanted to hide away the fact that you're using CGI. And so you would go ahead and construct a URL, where you'd have abc/a/b/c, and then you'd pull it apart using rewrite rules like this. You can see the idea here. Anyway, you end up with a lot of boilerplate. Boilerplate sucks. No one wants to write boilerplate. It's just not fun to do. So what you get with Dancer is no boilerplate. In fact, move over, Bacon, there's something leaner. With Dancer, you get all of the power and expressiveness of Perl in a really compact form. So you can build web apps in a surprisingly short amount of code lines. Now, recently, most of you are familiar with the Perl 5 Renaissance. Don't call it a comeback. It's Moose, DivX class, Plaque, tons of other great stuff, especially in 5.10. I'm actually going to be talking about some 5.10 regex stuff. So I think that at this point, almost all the major Linux distributions are up to 5.10 as a base, even though they're still pretty far behind like where Core is right now. But at least all of them are up to 5.10 that I'm aware of. And one of the problems that I had kind of coming into the environment here, and if you listen to the last talk where Andy Lester was kind of giving some tips and tricks for like getting it integrated into open source projects, that's kind of where my story with this comes up with Dancer. When I first started with Dancer, Alex was really focused on, Alex Sucria developed the project and started it, and it was really focused on development work. And so the documentation was available, but it was, I was sad to say, it was really kind of incomplete, and it was hard for me to bootstrap on it. And so what I decided to do was go ahead and write some tutorial applications and document all of them so that people that were newbies like me could have a place to start with that. And that's where these slides kind of sort of came out with. A lot of the examples are here pulled straight out of those tutorial applications. But one of the other problems I had was I felt like Catalyst, while being a fantastic and mature web framework, was just really too heavyweight for me. It has a really steep learning curve. There's a lot of things that you need to be aware of when you start with Catalyst. And to me, the friendliness of Dancer, expressing hello world in like 5 lines of code was like, wow, that's really super powerful, and I totally understand how this is going to work. So I just felt like Catalyst was too intimidating. And so that's why I felt like I needed to move to Dancer. And so that's what I did. I entered Dancer, and I wrote these tutorial applications. Now, the thing about Sinatra-inspired frameworks is that there's actually quite a few of them, as you can see. Because this is Perl, we need to have 2. We need to have more than one way to do this. So we have Mojo, which is also perfectly awesome. It's just something that came along a little bit later to me than Dancer, and it's also something that I just haven't spent a lot of time on. I figured Dancer is pretty awesome, and it's good enough for what I'm working on, and so I'm just going to stick with it. But Mojo is also cool, and when I was doing my research for my other talk, actually really found some powerful stuff in there that is great. Actually, just a quick plug for that. If you guys like LWP user agent, but you want more bells and whistles, you got to check out Mojo user agent. It's really, really slick. It does asynchronous out of the box. It does XML parsing out of the box. It does JSON parsing out of the box. You just get a lot of good stuff with it. So if you're looking for an LWP replacement, I would highly recommend that you check that out. Also Flask. Actually, Flask has 2 as well. There's one called Bottle that I didn't put up here that's along the same frameworks. There's a really tiny baby one in Fitzgerald called that's for PHP. And then Node.js, which was like the new sexiness at OSCON last summer, has one called Express that people are really happy about. But in short, Dancer is really easy to learn. It's expressive, and it's super efficient. So we're going to talk about each one of these things in sequence. The first thing I want to talk to you about is how easy Dancer is to learn. So we're going to go through some examples now and some basic concepts. First of all, Dancer builds routes, and the way that it builds routes is that it contains 1 or more HTTP verbs. It has a route specification, and that could be as simple as a literal string, like I want you to match on /hello. and that is actually a route definition, and it has a handler, which is an anonymous subroutine. So it's pretty straightforward. Really what you're saying is, I want you to match this verb on this particular URL specification, and then when you get that combination, I want you to execute some subroutine I'm going to pass into you. So this is an actual complete full answer program. We start with our typical used answer definition at the top. Next, we're going to specify the verb, get. Then we're going to have the route, which is slash, so it's the root. And then we have an anonymous subroutine, which is return hello world. So we just want to return some text, and that's it. And then at the bottom, we just put start, which says, hey, once you get this point, initialize yourself and do all the magic behind the scenes. So I already broke this down for you, but just to sort of lay it out a little bit cleaner, the main thing I wanted to point out to you was this thing right here. Come on, what is that? Okay, what happens if you leave that semicolon off?
It composes the statement along without one it fails.
Yeah, so if you leave this off because this is an anonymous subroutine and you leave this semicolon out, it makes the answer very sad, and it will make your Perl compiler very sad. And you will actually literally spend hours trying to figure out what's wrong because it looks right, but actually won't compile. And you'll be like, "Urgh." So don't do that. Anyway, I wrote this example application called Dancer. It's a complete ripoff of an example application that I found for the Flask framework called Flasker. You can see why I took the name Dancer. But basically what it is a tiny little microblog. It's very silly, but it's also very short. It's literally like 100 lines of code. So we're going to actually talk about most of the things in this particular example application in this talk today. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you're going to feel comfortable enough that you could go out and write your own Dancer application pretty easily. Again, if there are questions while I'm talking, feel free to interrupt me. I know that I have 50 minutes, but I actually have more than 50 minutes of material, so I may have to skip over some slides at the end. So hopefully we won't need to do that, but if we do, it's okay. So, all right, so the first thing I wanted to show you was this big route handler. You can see that this shares a lot of commonality with the previous one. It's just a little bit more complex. But it starts exactly the same way. The first thing you get is the verb. In this case, again, it's get. We have the route specification. And finally, we have the code routine. And you'll see that actually in this case, there's a semicolon here too, right? And this is this template keyword. We're going to talk more about template keyword pretty soon. But you can see there's one here and one here. Those are very important. That's just the way Perl is. Sorry. But something else that I wanted to point out to you is that if you've already written a lot of CGI scripts and you're comfortable with that, then this is actually really straightforward when you sort of break it down. Because all the stuff that's in green over here is pretty much standard straight-up DBI, CGI integration. So you're reading stuff out of a database, and you're gathering it into some sort of data structure, and now you want to pass it off to a template. So if you've already been doing CGI programming, really the only thing that's different about this is the fact that it's sort of wrapped up in this anonymous subroutine. So we come to the template keyword now. I've told you we'd talk more about this, and the time has come to do that. The first thing that you should know here is that we have this show entries.tt. And what this means is I want you to take this data structure, or actually what it means is I want you to load this template and pass in these variables here in this list, and then actually in this anonymous hash. And since template itself is a keyword, which means that it's implemented as a subroutine, you need to have a semicolon here. But anyway, straightforward again. I already said what those are for. We're going to pass in a bunch of stuff. You can see that you can do function calls in there to load up data. You can pass in built-in keywords like this one, URI4/add, which actually tells Dancer to say, look up the handler for /add and then substitute here an actual literal string for that entire thing. And then we have all of our entries, which is this data structure that we generated way up here. Okay? Is everyone following along with me? Anyone lost? It's okay if you're lost. Okay, good. I already talked about that one, so we're going to skip. So what this is actually showing you the actual template. Now, this talk isn't about template creation, so I'm not going to go too much into this, but one of the things I thought was important was kind of to pull back all the curtains so you see exactly how everything works end to end. So this is a pretty straightforward template toolkit template. There is a difference between this and stock template toolkit. Does anyone know what it is? What? Yeah, that's right. So in stock template toolkit, they actually use square brackets, but here we're using angle brackets. I just want to point that out real quick. Like everything else is exactly the same.
Why?
Why does it use angle brackets? That's a great question. Now, Dancer ships with a template module built in. So it comes out of the box with a templating engine. It's just the templating engine that it comes with is not very sophisticated. But it does use the angle brackets. So the idea is that you can write your stuff to start with the built-in templates, and then later, if you need the power of template toolkit, and most of you probably will, you can just continue to use your old templates without having to redefine the bracket style. But that is a difference that it comes with out of the box between stock template toolkit and what Dancer typically does with template toolkit. Now, it is totally configurable. If you already have templates that use square brackets or whatever, you can set Dancer to use square brackets. It's totally easy to do, and you can do it. It's very simple. But out of the box, you get angle brackets. So we already talked about that. All right, so this is a if. This if statement is part of template toolkit. It's just logic, just like you would assume. But you can see what it's trying to do here is it's saying that if this hash value entries, if it has any size, if it has any members in it, then I want you to go ahead and execute this iteration here. So every time we pull an ID out of the hash, I want you to print out a list. That's essentially what that says. So you can see I'm doing a whole bunch of a bunch of hash operations here. Is everyone clear on that, on what's going on here? Questions are totally fine. Just to reiterate, all of that data came from this value. This is the route handler I showed you at the beginning. So all this stuff comes from this particular key, and you can see that it's coming straight out of the database. Right there. Okay, it's quiz time again. You can see that in this template I actually have something at the top called entries. Is that related to anything in the data structure that we're passing in? No, it is not. You win a star. Thanks for playing along. That's actually a CSS class, so it has nothing to do with the data structures at all, but it does share the same name, and it's unfortunately named, I should probably change it. But I didn't want you to be confused by that, because I could understand, if you're not really familiar with how CSS works, that would definitely be confusing. All right, so let's talk about how Dancer directory structures are set up. In my example application, which is a really, really simple application, I don't have very advanced directory structure. Directory structure with Dancer has kind of a defined template. And actually, Dancer comes with a command line tool that will build the entire directory structure for you. It's Dancer -A and then your project name. And it will build out your entire directory structure. But I just wanted to kind of give you the flavor without all the overhead of what you get out of Dancer -A, because it gives you more than what you might need for a really simple project like this one. So the way that this starts is that you have your directory way up the top here. You have your actual script that implements your application right here. You have this folder called public, and then in here you have a whole bunch of stuff, and it's like CSS. You got your CSS file. You may have additional things in here like jQuery or other JavaScript libraries that you want to include in your app. Those all go here underneath the public. And then you have this views folder, and this is where you actually end up putting all of your templates. So all the templates would go under views, and then this can be all the templates here. You see the show entries. We've got login, which we haven't covered yet, but we will. And then we have a main TT, which is kind of like a layout is the idea where you have an overarching look and feel of your website. The one way to implement that is to implement it as a template here and then stuff all this stuff into it. So you render this and then you render one of these two things, depending on what you're doing. So a whole bunch of arrows. We're going to skip over those. Dancer is expressive. It's really expressive and lets you get a lot done with a really short amount of code. So let's talk about another route. Before, in my slide a few minutes ago, we talked about the add, URI for add. And this actually implements the add route handler. And we have a whole bunch of new keywords here that I'm going to point out to you. One of them is session. Where did session come from? Well, it comes from the login handler, which we haven't talked about yet. But we will. So just hang on with me on that one, okay? We'll come back to that. We also have another built-in keyword called send error. So that means if I'm not logged in other words, if I don't have a session started, then go ahead and return 401, not logged in. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. One thing that I wanted to tell you is that the actual use of the word return there can be significant. It was more important in previous versions, although recent releases have made it less so, that you return things. Before, it was like, if you didn't use return, it would go ahead and complete the rest of your route. So if you had something that errored out or whatever, it might actually execute more of your code than you want it to. And so if you use return, it would return at the proper time. In more recent releases, that's not true, but it is possible that this is still significant. So my personal preference is to put it in there. It may not strictly be necessary. So it's up to you. It's a style thing, although sometimes it's not. So I just use it all the time. That way I don't get into trouble. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about here was the redirect keyword. And you guys can probably guess what that does. It redirects you to some other route handler. And just like before, in the middle, we have all this red code. We have all this red straight up DBI stuff. There's like no magic incorporated into this at all. It's very, very vanilla DBI code that you guys probably have written 1,000 times. There is, I guess, a couple of things I wanted to talk about in this particular code block, and that is that we're using parameterization. You can see in the question marks, and also we're using the params keyword. So we're pulling out a couple of parameters that come from the post. So when you post data to Dancer, things that you post in there end up in this hash that you can access using params, and so we're going to pass that into our database. I do have a public service message here about Bobby tables, which I know that Andy Lester also talked about in the previous talk. So actually it's kind of interesting that we got stacked back to back, and his talk has almost nothing to do with my talk, but we're still kind of talking about some of the same things. So, but yeah, use Bobby tables. If you don't, you'll be sad. And you can see here, this is what we're doing. And you can do stuff like that. Let's talk about configuration. So Dancer is very configurable. I've mentioned that before. There are various things that you can configure. Some of the most important ones are the session engine. So do you want your sessions to be stored in YAML files? Do you want them to be stored in memory? Do you want to be stored in memcached? Do you want them to be stored in Redis? There's a whole bunch of different session engines and session storage technologies that you can use. They're all plugin based, and they're all configurable through YAML files. You can also configure them inline. In fact, we're going to talk about that in just a second. There's templating engines. There's a whole bunch of different ones for that. There's Template Toolkit I already talked about. There's the one that comes out of the box. That's pretty simple. It's fine if you have simple needs, but Template Toolkit, I think there's Mason. There's a whole bunch of different ones. I mean, you guys know that Perl has 50,000 templating engines, so there's mostly probably 20,000 Dancer interfaces for the templating engines. Logging, like do you want debug log level? Do you want info log level? Do you want your logs to go to a file? Do you want them to go to the console? All that good stuff. And then finally there's plugins, which we'll talk more about at the end of this slide deck. But the idea here is that plugins can add keywords to your Dancer interface. So they let you do magic stuff in a very short amount of code. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. So here's some configuration examples that are in line. As I said, most configurations in a sort of real Dancer app, not a demo, you would do in a YAML file. And those files are broken out by environment. So the idea is that maybe you have a development.yaml file where you have stuff like show errors. I've highlighted that. Super, super useful for debugging. Really, really not very good for production. Do not use this in production. But it is super useful for demo purposes and also for doing development work. What show errors does actually is dump your entire error stream to the browser. And there are plugins that let you do all sorts of other cool stuff. And if you use Plaque middleware, you can do even more cool stuff. So super, super useful to have that set up. You can see some of the other things that I've done here. Simple is the session manager that you get out of the box with Dancer. It's an in-memory thing, so as long as your web app is running, it will maintain session for you. As long as it has free RAM too. But yeah, so simple in-memory session handling. Template Toolkit, we talked about that. Set my log to console. set the log level to debug. One of the cool things about Dancer is you can actually use any arbitrary key value pairs that you want. And you can do that inline or in the YAML file. So for example, here I'm setting username to admin and the password to, don't tell anyone, password. Okay? Seriously, don't tell anyone. Some of the other things that you can do are really cool. You can do routes with regex. And I'm sure you guys guessed that this was coming. But there's some really neat stuff that you can do with this that can save you a ton of validation steps later on down the line. So let's kind of break this regex apart. First of all, we have the AZ stuff. These are sort of newfangled style Perl 510 regex. So hopefully they're not unfamiliar. Is anyone confused by this so far? Okay, good. And then we have the middle part, the most important part here. And what the question mark bracket code bracket does is actually says, if you match this pattern, I want you to stuff it into this variable called code. Actually, it's not a variable, it's a hash entry. But anyway, we'll get to that in a second. If you match this pattern, I want you to stuff this value into a hash key called code. And what we're matching here is, of course, A to Z, 0 through 9. And since this actually is a good Unicode regex to use, since it will match literally those things and nothing else, that would surprise you, unlike \d might. Right, so I already mentioned that this is a 510. So if you're not using use v510 or you're not using 5010 or greater, then this won't work. Your Perl compiler will be sad. And I also mentioned that it goes into a hash ref. In Dancer, there's a keyword built in called captures, and that's what it's for. So normally, the hash ref that it gets stuffed into is called %+. And I don't know why they chose %+, because I think that's probably the single most worst variable name that you could have, but that's what it's called. And in Dancer, you can actually just use the much more elegant captures and a dereference. You get back your value. So it's really nice. It's much better reading than if you actually used raw %+. You can also do routes with name parameters. Now, this is a direct lineage from Sinatra, because this is how Sinatra defines wildcard or named variables. And it's exactly the same. So there's really nothing here that you guys haven't seen before. Really the only thing that's different is the fact that you have a colon in front of code, where code is that value. So if you have that, you can see where it will match colon code. We'll stuff it in the params. You can pull it out with params and do something with it. Under the hood, what's happening is it's matching dot plus. So if you do this, if you do colon code, you're actually saying, I want to match dot plus. And whatever you get in dot plus, that's what I'm going to put into params code. So you have to do your own input sanity at that point. So way back at the beginning, like, 25 minutes ago, I talked about how CGIPM started out and how we might do input validation. And this is, super old school. But the idea was is I wanted to capture an integer and only an integer. And so what I can do now with Dancer is I can actually specify directly in the URL route that I want to match something called A, and it has to be an integer. I want to match something called B, and it can be anything. And I want to match something called C, and it can be anything. But it has to be 3 parameters in a row and under some namespace. So the cool thing about that is I've already validated my input. If this matches, I'm guaranteed that A is going to have an integer. Well, I'm guaranteed that it's going to have a Unicode numeral, which may or may not be an integer. But anyway, yeah, it's super good. And you guys are probably getting the message that Dancer is really efficient. It definitely is efficient. We're going to talk more about that now. So far, we've looked at routes that only handle one verb. So get, and post. Some of the other verbs that you can do are like option, head. You can do delete. You can do put. All of the 8 verbs that are supported in the standard are supported by Dancer. Is patch supported yet? Oh, wow, that's pretty slick. All right, well, that's neat. So what we're looking at now is a route handler, and this is the fabled login handler that I've mentioned a few times. It actually takes 2 different verbs, so it can match any, and you'll see that it's followed by an array which lists the methods that it will match, get, and post. Now, one thing that is different between this route handler and some of the other ones, aside from the fact that it's followed by a list, is this. You've got this weird arrow there. What the heck is that thing doing there? Does anyone know? All right, that's fine. It'll be a mystery. The first thing that is different about this is the fact that because we're taking two different verbs here, we could either have a request that comes in as a post or it comes in as a get. And so we need to figure out which one it is because the behavior of this route handler is different based on what verb it gets. So if the request is a post, then we're going to do some stuff. And then here we have the session. So you guys can see that if it's a post, we're going to do stuff under here, which we're going to skip for now. But if it's not, then we're going to go ahead and start a session. So we're going to log ourselves in. We're going to send a flash message here that says you're logged in, and then we're going to redirect them back to the root. Something that I just wanted to mention about session specifically is that, again, it's pretty much a key value type thing. So you can use pretty much any arbitrary key values that you want. One thing that's interesting about Dancer is that it has this true value defined for you. So true is an actual thing that you can call, and it will return a true value. I think it's actually 1. It's defined as 1. But it will return a true value to you no matter what it actually is under the hood. So it's kind of nice for readability purposes if you decide to use that in your code. So let's go back to the code before. If the request is a post, then what's going to happen is we're going to do all the input handling, right? And then if it's not a post, we're going to come back and we're going to display the login.tt. So if we get a get, in other words, if the request is a get verb, we're going to display this template. And if there's an error, we're going to show that too. If it is a post, then we're going to do all the input handling, make sure that the username is admin, the password is password, and then we're going to set up a login session and redirect everyone back to root. In other words, we're going to have a state change. Dancer is also really configurable. I mentioned that before. It's really configurable. Another way that it's super configurable is that you can hook a lot of the methods and things that it does. For example, you can hook serialization and deserialization. You can hook rendering. You can hook templates. And you can hook errors. So you can do handling before and after each one of these things that will allow you to manipulate things that come in and out of those types of routines. So for example, one of the things that you can do in Dancer is you can say, I want to take something from JSON and turn it into a Perl data structure. And if the JSON decoder is not doing what you need it to do for some reason, or you need to inflate some value with an object or whatever, you can totally do that. It's pretty straightforward to do. I have some more demos here of things that are neat. You can do route forwarding. The idea with this is that maybe you have code handlers that do some object or some, you have a route handler that does some operation. For example, like you display data, but you also have like demo data or dummy data or something like that. So what you can do is you can actually do route forwarding where you would say something like, if I get this route of demo foo and bar, then I'm going to take my bar and set it to whatever the value is there. I'm going to load up my magic demo database, and then I'm going to forward it to the actual production foo bar. And that will use the same code path, but using your dummy data. So the idea here is that you don't have to cut and paste data. You can fetch your data in this route and then forward it to the real route handler that does actually all the rendering and display and all that stuff. So that's kind of cool. All right, so Sawyer says they support patch. I'm not surprised by that, but that's a pretty new verb. So one other neat thing you can do is prefixing. Prefix starts a name scope. So what you can do here is you can say, I want to start all of my routes with the string /user, and then I'm going to define a whole bunch of route handlers underneath it, or you can say like user view add and get, user view add and edit, and then you do like prefix undef, and that ends the scope. And then you can define exactly the same name here at the bottom, UID, which is actually at the root. So up here, it's under /user, and here it's at the root. And that can save you a lot of typing as well, especially if you have a long root. Or another thing that's really useful for is if you want to sort of isolate all of your route handlers into discrete modules. So if you wanted to put all of your user handlers into a user.pm, you could easily do that using the prefix keyword. we talked about Dancer plugins. We talked about earlier. We talked about how Dancer plugins add keywords to your Dancer core. Some of the plugins that I think are kind of neat are ones that auto-create RSS feeds. It's really slick. There's a really nice Twitter integration. So if you want to have users log in to your Dancer app through Twitter, there's a plugin that does that. There's plugins for Dbix class integration. There's a semi-experimental one that kind of does CRUD operations based on a database schema. It will auto-build a lot of stuff for you. It's pretty neat. And there's a lot more. There's more every day. And if you go out to MetaCpan or whatever and you search for Dancer plugin, you'll actually get a pretty nice list of all of them. They're really useful. Just to toot my own horn a little bit, one of the plugins that I've worked on myself is Dancer plugin database. It's pretty handy. One of the keywords that it gives you is called database. That may mean it is not a surprise. But what it does is it gives you the actual handle that it opens for you. And it means that you can do pretty straightforward syntactic sugar stuff like this, where you'd say database prepare and then some query and execute it. But there's even more sweet syntactic sugar. There's these things called quick underscore methods. One of them is quick insert, where you can just say, I want to insert this hash ref into my table, where the hash is basically a list of column names and values, and it will insert it for you. You can also do stuff like this, where you say, I want to render a template called userdetail.tt, and it's going to do a quick select from my table where the ID is 42. Or obviously that could be parameterized, but it's not here. So in short, Dancer is awesome. Yeah, it is. Seriously. Here's all the different things I've talked about today. All the demo code is available on Bitbucket. It's specifically available at that URL at the top. The documentation, since I wrote this slide deck, has really improved a lot. That's been a main focus for the development team for the last, 12 months, 18 months. A lot of work has gone into documentation. It's a lot better. It's a lot easier for newbies to get involved with using Dancer in their code and production projects every day. There's also Dancer database plugin that I talked about. And then if you want to install this for yourself, you can use cpan-. That curl command is broken now because Git switched to HTTPS, so I need to update the slide. But if you do curl -- insecure capital L cpan-, and then you pipe that to Perl, it will actually do all the installations for you. Dancer, YAML, and template. So, thanks. Are there questions? Thank you. So I ended pretty fast, but yeah, questions.
So I thought I read earlier this year that
It is, yeah. So they're working on Dancer 2. Sorry, do you want to talk about that?
we're working on Dancer 2.
Man, I can't believe that's like the
Oh, it's going to be somewhat backwards compatible, but in some aspects it won't be. Some like really important aspects, because a lot of the things in Dancer, in order to provide good sugar, we need to do some global stuff that we really didn't like. And then we got some help, and Matt Trout, MC, actually helped us quite a bit, and we are rewriting it using Moo. So it's going to be completely object-oriented from the get-go, and it's going to be encapsulated correctly, and it's going to be so much better and probably a bit faster also. We're still not done, so you can use Dancer and hopefully move to it without too many changes. It won't break so much.
So yeah, I'm not sure like exactly what the release date is. All the work that, yeah, it'll be ready. Sawyer says it'll be ready for Christmas, like Perl 6. Hopefully sooner than Perl 6. But yeah, hopefully Christmas within the next decade, I would say. But yeah, so they are working on a rewrite, and yeah.
You're more than welcome to help.
Yeah, Moo is good stuff, by the way. Let me plug Moo. I started using, I've drunk the Moose Kool-Aid pretty thoroughly, but one of the things that bugged me about it was that it's really heavyweight. Moo is all the goodness of Moose without all the meta objects that you don't need, unless you really need them. If you really need them, then use Moose, but if you don't, then use Moo. So, any other questions? Yes?
You already compared modulation
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly that I would say that it's better, faster, or lighter. I would just say that for me personally, it ended up being a better choice. And it was just something that I came to that I understood a lot more quickly. I mean, as I said, I think Mojo is a perfectly great framework to do development work in. It's just for me personally, Dancer was something that I already understood, and it's just gotten better as time went along. I have started playing with Mojo more than I had in the past, and I do really like it. It's got some really cool stuff out of the box, but for me, Dancer was just the better choice for me personally. So, I mean, compared to Catalyst, I would say on a spectrum, I would probably say, for me personally, Dancer was the easiest to understand. Then I would put Mojo kind of in the middle, not as heavy as Catalyst, and then over here I'd have Catalyst, which is very heavyweight, a steep learning curve.
When you say Mojo, are you referring to Mojo?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, there's a wiki engine called Mojo Mojo. I'm not talking about that. It's also written in Perl, but it's
Because Modulism was sort of created by the people who did Catalyst, be
yeah,
lightweight and small. Right?
yeah, it is, yeah.
We've actually been looking at Dancer, trying to figure out, based on the talks that you've given in Frozen Pearl, I kind of brought this forward to my group at Wells Fargo, trying to ask if they would consider using it.
Oh, cool. Great.
So kind of like
Steep in the Kool-Aid. It's good for you. Yeah.
I read somewhere that the answer is using the DSL domain specific language, but this seems like Perl.
It sort of is. I mean, it is exactly what Sawyer said. It's a DSL that is interpreted by Perl itself.
It's almost entirely the same data. Like the basic verbs and everything is the same. Sinatra.
Yeah, so one of the things that I didn't talk about yet, but was really interesting to me was, because I did this other talk that I mentioned at the top of the hour, was that I've written the same web application in 4 different frameworks, and except for Erlang, which is Erlang and it's therefore a unicorn, the commonality between all the different implementations is very, very close together. So if you take the Flask implementation, you change like putting sigils in front of variables, it pretty much will run straight up as a Dancer app or a Mojo app without really any other changes to it. So it's quite remarkable. There seems to be kind of an emerging consensus that a domain-specific language that's based loosely on Sinatra should have these verbs called X, Y, and Z, and they're pretty common across all the different platforms. I mean, the details obviously are going to be different, but in their form, they're pretty much the same. So let me go back to this page right here, in case anyone wants to see it, because I know people want to see it. Are there any other questions or comments? Or
What was that arrow about? You kind of skipped over that one. You said there's an additional arrow.
my snarky mystery framework?
Yeah. I guess it's just a comma, right?
Yeah, it's a fat comma, and that's really all it's for. I mean, you could actually put a comma there, but what it does is it quotes everything on the left side. So any is implemented as a subroutine, and it takes this parameter list, and you have to quote that. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Have great